Hey y'all, I told you in my last episode, this is something new for me. I'm not used to being on video, but I do have a fantastic guest for us today, Jeanette Frem. So thank you so much for being on, Jeanette. How are you?
You are awesome, and I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited. I love sharing the word about this.
I love it. Tell our audience a little bit about you. I had the pleasure of meeting you through one of our consultants named Kay, and you were down here doing some research. And I don't remember if you used some of our patients.
I don't think. Well, I can't remember. There may have
They
been
were all
some that
messed together,
not at
but
your office, but they may have come to the other
come to the
office.
other office. But tell us a little bit about you and your background for those who don't know who you are and
Yeah,
where you physically are in the
yeah, yeah,
country.
yeah. Hi. So I'm Jeanette Mesite Frem, and I am in central Massachusetts, so near Worcester, Massachusetts, Worcester, as we say here. And I am an IBCLC. I was a doula for a long time, childbirth educator still. And I started working with people who are lactating when I was serving in a village in Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa, in the early 90s, working as with a midwife. And so we were doing a lot around lactation then, but I had no idea I was going to get into it. And then eventually I went on for a master's in public health and focused on maternal and child health and actually took an entire course as part of my graduate degree on nutrition for human lactation and pregnancy, which was fascinating. So anyway, I eventually had my kids. I nursed. I pumped. I This is a long time ago. There was one choice of a pump at that time, really two if you were using one that was a very expensive one that mostly was in a hospital or someone would rent. And I just barely got enough milk, and I had to pump nights and weekends to get enough milk to collect for just the 3 days of childcare that my baby was in. And now I know it was because of flange sizes, and I did not invent the concept of flange sizing, but I don't know, I guess I refined it and created a guide that people seem to like. And I've got a research study coming out very, very soon that proves what I'll be telling you today.
Yes, 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 yes. So for parents, today we're going to cover this, flange and pump parts and when things should be replaced maybe and how to get like what is not a good fit and what might be a better fit and how to get that. And then for doulas and birth professionals, Jeanette, tell us a little bit about some of the education that you offer because this is really important because in our country, at least in the United States, lots and lots of women are going back to work and they do need to get some support in pumping. So if a doula can help, that would be amazing. But we need whoever's teaching to be up to speed on the latest information. This is also really helpful for inpatient lactation consultants. So tell us a little bit about where professionals can go to learn a little bit more about how to do this.
So I have short courses and long courses for perinatal professionals, which include doulas and nurses. I have IBCLC courses. I have Facebook groups, one that you can join if you're just interested in this, and others you join if you take my workshops. I do them in person. I speak at conferences, and I also have them on demand. So I don't know, I estimate based on some data that there's probably about 13,000, maybe a little bit more lactation professionals around the world that have heard me speak about this. So even people in other countries are doing what I'm
Yeah,
talking about and seeing the results. And that's the biggest piece is just
right.
try it. That's my big message.
So I hopefully later on you'll send me those links to your Facebook group or whatever else you
Mm-hmm.
want people to have access to, and
Yep.
I'll put this on our YouTube channel and in the show no links. But I do want to be clear: sizing yourself does not stop with just using one of these little silicone
Yes.
sizers with the little holes punch, like little
Mm-mm.
sizers with the circles that say like 27 or 25 or
Mm-hmm.
13 or 21. That's not where the buck stops.
No. And unfortunately, the history, can I start there? Because I find it fascinating. The history of flange sizing fascinates me. And basically the truth of it is in the early 1800s there were two men. We love men in our lives, but there were two guys, and one was a dad who had a lot of money. I'm guessing nobody knows their names, but we know this happened, where there was one guy that had a lot of money. His wife felt uncomfortable or was, too engorged, and for some reason he thought, let me go to the local glassblower and let's see if we can create some sort of bike horn kind of thing. And between this dad and a bike and the glassblower, they figured out how to make something. They decided to go with like a 24, 25 millimeter flange. And what I mean by that is the opening, this little tunnel, this opening in there, and the size of that tunnel where your nipple is. And a lot of people think it was based in cow pumping, and that may have been a reference point. I need to check my numbers as far as when dairy pumping machines were invented. I know it was in the 1800s at some point, but it was similar. But either way, it was just a couple guys, and even if it was the dairy pumping world, it's still a couple guys that created this, and it's just been perpetuated ever since. And so a lot of people think there's evidence for this, and that pump companies say use the sizes we provide. They think there's a reason for that. Longtime hospital-based IBCLCs and nurses think that this is the way it is. It's just not true. And it's only been recently that, probably since the 2010s, that people have been even making other size flanges. And those of us in the lactation world and parents have been trying them and seeing the results.
And when you say this is not true, what you are referencing is that it's not true that most women fit in the flanges that are inside their size. The boxes that come, which are 24
Usually
and 28.
24
Is that
and
right?
27, 24, 28. Now some of them are including a 21. I will tell you that probably my personal estimation is probably that 99.9% of the planet is smaller than a 24, and probably 98% of the planet is smaller than a 21. So it's really rare. And even
I would
19
agree.
is not that common in my practice.
I totally agree.
Occasionally. Yeah.
I would say that before we even jump to this, I feel like they used to just make like the 24s and the 28s. And then when you would try to get them I don't know if off label's the right word, but get them from Amazon or whatever, they would come in odd numbers like 15, 17, 19. And then now they're coming in evens too. So we're making some progress here. But okay, so let's talk about this. I'm pregnant. Let's pretend. I am not in real life.
This is news.
No, I am not past that. So let's pretend that I'm a listener and I'm pregnant, or I recently gave birth and I'm not sure when to pump. That's something you need to work out with your lactation consultant. But let's pretend like I am going to eventually pump, and I have this box with a pump in it that my insurance company sent me. Do you hear an echo by chance?
No.
Okay. So let's pretend I have this pump in the box and I don't know what to do with it, but you should know when you open that box, you're going to get, I'll show you some pictures. You're going to get like some bottles like this. And then you're going to get what is this called, Jeanette? Backflow protector. And what people should know is that you don't have to wash these every time.
Correct. Just keep it dry.
So you get these pieces, right? And then you get some tubes. And you're supposed to snug it in there, okay? And then really important, you also get this white thing. This is called a duckbill, or what's another word? What do you call it? I don't know what you call it. Membranes or duckbill. And so that goes on here nice and snug. And so do you happen to know off the top of your head when you're supposed to replace these things? Because I don't really know offhand.
So some people say every month, but I think it depends on how often you pump and how you handle them. I think what's important is to evaluate them to make sure. I just had a client recently that brought these in, and they actually, I don't know if you can see it. Oh, there it is. There's a tear.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Yeah, and both of them had tears, and she's like, my pump's not working. And I'm like,
oh, that's why.
Your duckbills, they're torn to shreds. So they weren't working, and we put new duckbills in, and the pump worked fabulously again. But you want to make sure that the lips of this duckbill close. You see how that's even puckered right there?
Yep, that's such a good picture.
That may be fine, actually. See if the pump works well for you. But if it's not, then maybe there's a tear or it's worn out. I mean, there's silicone they can wear out. I'm not sure that every month is always necessary. I like to say when you feel like it's not working anymore, then put new ones on.
Well, it's kind of like when you buy sneakers, right? There's like a rule. It's like if you run every day, you probably need to buy sneakers for every month. But if you're only running, I don't know, it depends how far you're running too. So it's not like an absolute. So I love that answer. So these are all the parts you're going to get in your pump. And I'm not really endorsing a particular brand, but generally speaking. And so this piece is called a flange. This part that's
Some people call it a breast shield.
Shield. I have a blog article on breast shield. Someone thought I was talking about a nipple shield. No, a breast shield or a flange. And so this one you can see says size 13. Sometimes the size is printed there. Sometimes the size is printed on the long barrel part. And so this is called a flange. And so what we're trying to say is that they come in a box, and it's usually a size 24 or 28. Even if you get a 21, it's probably not your size. Because it's very similar to like getting a box of shoes in the mail and they're a size 12 and a size 10. Well, what if you're a size 6? Like, what are you supposed to do with that? And so tell us how will a mom know that they're not properly fitted in their flange? that's the first question. And the second question is, what are some of the drawbacks if you're using too large of a pump flange?
So pump flanges that are in the box, right? The manufacturer is going to give you a guideline on how to measure your nipples. They might include, a lot of them now are including these circle rulers. Although, again, if you just have a ruler in your house, that's fine.
Sufficient.
We're just trying to get an idea. But what they've been saying for years, and will be in the pump manufacturer's guidelines on the online or in the box, it'll say measure your nipple base, which would mean like the bottom part of your nipple. Now, some people, the tip is the same as the base, right? But not everybody's, and you want to make sure that you kind of harden your nipple a little bit. You might have to squeeze it or just hold it for a second, just to kind of get it to shrink down and harden a little bit as much as you can. It's harder if you really truly do have flatter inverted
Right.
nipples.
That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah, but what they'll say is measure the base and add 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, 1 to 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters, up to 9 millimeters. And it'll say, and this should be your size. There is no evidence for that recommendation. Period. Doesn't exist. It's really random. It's just lore in the world. It's been handed down as we know this is true. It's not true.
Guesstimation.
But that's not true because you end up in too large. So I just finished a research study, and which we mentioned earlier, that is, we hope we're supposed to find out in any day now that it's going to be published, and we'll find out when, but here's hoping. Where it really proved that it's the nipple tip that matters. And so that makes it easier for me because so many people have a hard time figuring out where does the tip and the base, where does the base end, when does it become areola? So the tip is easier. And you're just trying to get an idea of what sizes are we going to try, because my method, which is called the Flange Fits Guide, FITS, is capitalized. It stands for several different things. And
all of our patients in our practice get your FITS guide.
It's so cute. You have it laminated too. I saw that.
Yes. And I have it digitally that I give to everyone, and it has your watermark on it. And
awesome.
We just think you're the best.
21 languages. By the end of this year, it should be in 26. So, but it's really about results. So we're trying to make sure that we're trying several sizes to see what feels the best to the pumping person.
Yes.
What gets the most sprays out. And then ultimately, as you pump more often, what gets milk out faster. Or even in one flange fitting session that you or I might do in our office, we can have plenty of our clients who are like, I've never gotten this much milk so fast. Or usually by this point in the pumping session, I wouldn't have this much milk, right? And so we're getting results immediately. We're seeing it immediately. Yes. They can say, I feel so comfortable. I like to say nothing or gentle tug is how it should feel. Same thing with nursing, right? And so too many people are tolerating it. And what we're finding is that all of this lore about how the sides of your nipples shouldn't touch the tunnel and you should add this many millimeters and it's normal for your nipple to swell, none of that is actually true. So we really are just using the measurement of the nipple tip to get a sense of which one should we try. And now there's so many different shapes of the same size too. And that makes it a little bit more complicated, or maybe we can look at that as more fun, but that enables us to get an even better fit for comfort and how much milk are we getting out for each person.
That's fantastic.
So you had a second question in there.
Well, you kind of answered it in one, which is like, what are some of the things that can happen when I'm not in the properly fitting flange?
People
and one of the
as
things,
much milk, they're in pain, they're uncomfortable. Yeah. Some people don't even know they're uncomfortable until they try a better flange.
Right, exactly. So like, I'm like, do you have any discomfort with pumping? And they're like, nope. And you could leave it at that, right? Or you can say, let me just fit you for a flange. What size are you using? Oh, I'm using a 21. I personally, I don't know why. I have a few gifts in life, but one of them is I can look at a nipple and I can tell you what size it is. I don't need a little measuring thing. I'm like, oh, you kind of look like a 15. They're like, there's no way. I measured myself in the hospital. The people in the hospital told me I was a 21. I got a 21. I'm like, okay, that's great. And I leave the room and I go to my sterilizer or my sanitizer and I grab a couple different size flanges and a couple bottles and I put them on. I'm like, try this one, try this one, try this one. Let's not know what size they are. Just let's look and let's see what your nipple does in the tunnel and how you feel, and then what's going on with the milk. And then let's pick a flange based on that. And at the end of the whole thing, it's like we end up with a size, and the size is always like 13, 15, 17, something like that. Yep. But the whole goal is, can we get you more comfortable? Can we get more milk out? Can we make it more efficient? What else? I mean, I feel like that's the name of the game when it comes to pumping. And so to give you an example, like every time I get on this podcast, I feel like a dork because I have done everything wrong. Like if you listen to any of my podcasts, I'm like, yep, with my baby, I did the exact opposite. Yep, all the things wrong. So if you were to measure me, I'm like a size 10. But I had super, super flat nipples from a lot of fluid. I was super puffy. So there was no like, where's the nipple? Where's the areola? Like who knew? It was a while later until you can see. That's another thing you should know is maybe I want to ask you the next question is when should you be measuring yourself prenatally, postnatally, pre-pump, after pump. So that's a question we'll put on pause. But the point is that I'm really a size, basically a 10, and I was pumping in a 28. But I'm going to tell you, I had a patient tell me why she thought that was appropriate before I educated her, and it made sense to me. So I want to share this with you just so that the poor moms, we don't know, but it makes sense in our brain. What she said to me was, when the baby nurses, I know the whole areola is supposed to go in the baby's mouth. So I expected when I pumped that the whole areola should go inside the tube in the tunnel. And I was like, that makes such logical sense. I see where you're going with that. Unfortunately, it's just not how the mechanics work because breastfeeding and having a tongue and a whole mouth involved expels milk with a different, it's not just sucking. They use a lot of different mechanisms in there, but when you use a pump, mostly it's the suction power. So I just want to say
it's the suction, but when the nipple's in the tunnel and it's only
compressed.
The nipple, it's supported. I don't want to use compressed. So if it's compressed, you're not going to get milk out. So the ideal is that you have just the right size tunnel, and it's going to glide along the sides, right? And we've all been told as we were coming in, as parents, but also as professionals in lactation, it shouldn't touch the sides. It shouldn't rub. It should glide comfortably along the sides, and that provides support, but it also enables, from a standpoint of physics, for the vacuum to just pull out the milk instead of working to get so much areola. But it's very similar in a way to, if you think about optimal oral anatomy on a baby, their tongue should be curling and touching the sides of that nipple, curling
and creating a vacuum,
suckling, and then there should be a palate that's also providing support, and the cheeks and the fat pads are providing support. So that, I think that what your client said of having the whole or a lot of the areola, depending on how large your areola is, in that tunnel made sense to her. I think that's where a lot of the original pump manufacturers were going with, well, we need to make sure this is big. Yeah.
And I feel like, I get that train of thought. We know better, so we do better now. Don't be like me and stick your size 10 nipple inside of a 28 flange. Tell me, I asked you a second question in there. I don't remember what it was just now. It was like,
I have to rewind and look. Gosh, we should write that down. There's so much about this, right?
I'm terrible.
When should you measure?
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Totally unscripted. This is what you get.
So I have actually started doing more and more. I will actually put a pump on someone who's pregnant if they want me to do a prenatal. Otherwise, I just sort of go, send me. I teach prenatal breastfeeding classes. Some of them are online, some are in person, and they're all live. I don't have a pre-recorded one yet, but I'll be like, oh, if you want to send me a picture of your nipples with a ruler, not touching your nipple, just in front of it, try to make it really, do a good job. Get it to be flat in front of the nipple without touching your nipple. But harden your nipple first by stimulating it a bit. And I will give you an estimation of which 3 flanges I think you should buy and maybe even bring to the hospital in case you have to start pumping in the hospital, which a lot of people do. So pumping is not just for people who go back to work in our country anymore, right? I think I've heard lots of people say they want to start pumping because, I don't know, I got a pump for free from my insurance. I thought I was supposed to. Or I am going back to work, so I need to build a stash. So week 1 or 2, they're already pumping, which is totally not necessary if nursing's working well. So I have done some flange fittings recently where I've actually pumped someone who is pregnant briefly with low suction, just enough to figure it out. But honestly, if that was the way that someone was going to go into labor, wouldn't that be the easiest thing in the world? We'd avoid so many medical
as a labor
infections.
nurse, I'm not even going to go there with that. I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about antenatal hand expression unless you're admitted to the antepartum unit for a shortened cervix or some other things going on.
But
the reason we bring that up,
38 weeks, have fun.
So it's just not something. It's not something that I see being a concern. And of course, if it is, we wouldn't do that. But what we're addressing is that there are some schools of thought that say you shouldn't do any nipple stimulation while pregnant because it could elicit preterm labor. But what I will tell you, and I tell my patients this, and y'all who are listening already, just act like we're just friends. You just know I say things that are off script. This is what the whole point is. nipple stimulation, the whole idea is a release in oxytocin could cause preterm labor. So what the advice should really be is don't have an orgasm, because that is what's going to cause a spike in oxytocin. And if you're worried about going into preterm labor, having an orgasm does have those like contractile type responses. Doing some nipple stimulation with a little bit of like 30 seconds of pumping to fit you for the rise size flange, I just don't really see like that's going to happen. We give people so much Pitocin in the hospital and we can't get them into labor. A little nipple stimulation, I just have never seen that happen. Like that's just
to clarify, you're not saying don't have an orgasm. You're saying for anybody who has been told that they shouldn't have an orgasm because of preterm labor that they have already had, or a shortened cervix where they know they're at high risk for preterm labor, that would be why. But yeah, so
yeah, that the advice about
that, no problem.
Yeah, the advice of like nipple stimulation could cause you to go into preterm labor. I would edit the statement to say things that cause you to have a spike in oxytocin, like having an orgasm, could put you into preterm labor if you are at risk. That's how I would make that statement. But I'm not the Academy, who am I to say? Anyway, before I get way off script, I wanted to kind of demo here and show
I want to say
you.
one more thing about pregnancy, though. So what I hear a lot from people, especially labor and delivery nurses and postpartum nurses, is, well, we have nipples that, with all this IV fluid, we've got some real swollen nipples, so those nipples are going to need larger flanges. I have yet to see that that's entirely true. But even if it is, if my dream comes true before I retire in 10 years maybe, if every hospital had all the size flanges, we could pump the nipple you see in front of us today with the flange that works best for that today. And then if that nipple is swollen and it gets smaller tomorrow, fine. Once they go home, they may find that they need an even smaller flange. So I don't really care what the truth is. We need to address what we're seeing today with that person, especially if you're seeing somebody or I'm seeing somebody in our office who's been using the wrong size flange for a long time, and now their nipple is really swollen, and as they may need to step down a little bit. I actually don't see that very often, but I think some people who have been mistakenly using really strong suction, even though they're in pain because someone told them to, and they're using a really large flange and they're exclusively pumping, and those nipples have just been trained to be swollen. You may need to slowly work your way down to the right size as you work on that swelling, but I don't think in general it's that, you're going to need a 21 and a 24 in the hospital, and then you go home and use a much smaller one. I think
that's a very good point. And I'm glad you said that. Excuse me. Because the reason I was asking the question is, when is the best time to size for the proper flange, is because of those statements of working in the hospital. And so, yes, prenatally is a great time to get sized. But then, you might be swollen and you might have edema, very, very common. Your nipple is still the same size. It's just a little bit swollen. So using the proper fitting flange would still be to your benefit, unless it's just grossly. It's like socks. Like you're a certain sock size, your ankles get really puffy. You don't want those socks, depending how puffy you are, to dig into your ankles. But your ankle is still the same size. It's still in there. It's just all the swelling is making it look artificially.
There are some IBCLCs who are working in some NICUs, some in Canada and in the U.S., who are communicating with me, and they have been able to get all the flange sizes
That's great.
into their hospitals, and they are actually doing actual flange fitting with those flanges with people who have babies in the NICU, and they are seeing more and more milk with those parents than they've ever seen before. So even immediately after delivery, they're getting more colostrum out.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
Hand expression is so wonderful. If it works well, go for it.
Yes, absolutely. Hand expression is for sure where the colostrum is that's what I recommend. But the next time, if you don't have the luxury of getting sized prenatally, then you got to work with what you have, right? And usually it takes people a week or so to get in to see us. We have a little bit of a wait list, so we will measure them then. And I feel like that's a good, true, pretty accurate. You've diuresed a lot. You've urinated a lot. Like a lot of that fluid has come off. And we do the flange fittings, and all the consultants walk around with a bag full of flanges and all the different sizes, and that's how we roll. I think it's really
sad about that, though. I'm the same thing. I don't see people in a hospital. I see them in my office. But what's sad is that there are people who went into that hospital planning on breastfeeding and or lactating, and because their baby or they had complications where they actually needed to start pumping in the hospital, they hated pumping because they only had access to those flanges in the hospital that usually are too big.
Yeah.
They ended up not getting milk out. Then they ended up not increasing how much milk they were making. And they might have also been in pain from those flanges.
Yes.
They're like, I quit. So they never
Yes.
end up coming to see either one of us
You're right.
because
You're
they already
100%.
quit within that first week.
Yep.
Whereas if they had the right size flanges, and even back to hand expression has become this. I mean, yes, we were all born with our own breast pumps, I like to say. Why take out something electronic or plastic if we don't need it, if our hands work? But that being said, all the research that shows that hand expression is so valuable, think about every other study ever done about pumping, even the ones that were comparing with hand expression, they were using the wrong size flanges on everybody, right?
Right.
So it's not quite what it means. It doesn't mean that hand expression is always better than the right size flange. We don't know that yet.
I do think with colostrum, with those first few days, using your hands to get colostrum out, just because it's such small quantities, those little droplets get stuck like in the plastic pieces. They don't actually get a lot of times to your baby.
There are new tools that some companies have made to collect that easier.
Mm-hmm. For the most, if the hospital right now don't have flanges, they sure as hell aren't going to have special devices to collect colostrum. So I'm just saying, we're gonna.
It's very sticky and very small. You're correct.
Yeah,
exactly.
But after day 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
And not for nothing, for me, I do remember having very terrible hand and wrist pain after delivery, and depending what kind of a labor you have, I just remember that being really challenging for me. But yeah, it is really sad if you. So this is something you bring up a good point. Like, it's really sad that people might in the hospital be recommended to pump for whatever the reason is. It's not breastfeeding should be the number one first thing you do, but if you're being told to pump for whatever reason, and they give you these ginormous pumps or flanges, and they're uncomfortable, you're not getting pump out. You're not getting milk out. You're not telling your brain to make more milk. You're having this negative experience. The whole thing is just negative, and it's not at all those warm, fuzzy, new mom experiences you expected. And by the time you go home, you're sleep deprived. You've had this human. Your nutrition maybe deficient, and you have to, like, every time you look at that pump, you're like, oh, I hate that pump, and I hate this part of my life. Why would I want to do that? And so sometimes they still make it to see me or us in our practice. And what I will tell you, I even had a mom that I took care of in the hospital for in-hospital mastitis management when I was a floor nurse, and she got it because she was using ginormous flanges, pumping on a very high setting on nipples that I don't remember if I think they were initially damaged by her baby, so she was told to pump, and pumping did hurt less than her baby, but not that much less, and all she did was create lots of injury to that sensitive tissue with high suction and an ill-fitting flange. And so the doctor, I remember working with this OB, and she had no idea that was what was happening. I was like, every time you pump, you're opening up those wounds again, because this is not the pump is not being used properly. So that's just something that people should know. Pumping is a piece of medical equipment, believe it or not, and you got to be trained on how to use it properly. So,
but even that training, right? Like, all lactation providers think that they have the knowledge, but it's hand-me-down knowledge in general. It's not that we're required as part of getting our IBCLC certification or becoming a labor and delivery nurse or postpartum nurse. You're not required to learn about pumps.
Yeah.
And when you do learn about it, however you do learn about it,
it's usually from the pump company.
It's usually from the pump company. And I have been able to, at no financial benefit to myself, talk to many, many people who work or are the CEOs at pump companies. And they're all lovely, but they don't want to change their ways because they perceive it's going to cost them money. And that's a whole other conversation we could talk for an hour about. But it's also that they're like, well, but this is what we've always known, and there's no research to show that we should change that.
Well, now there's going to be some research, hopefully.
And they also don't pump with actual humans. They're not required to. The FDA does not require any pump company to have ever used their machine on a human, by the way.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, looking at your background, I know it's a little fuzzy, but I've seen your background like without this filter or whatever is happening. And you have a jillion.
Last time you saw,
you have a jillion pumps in your office. So like
68 or 69 now.
Yeah, you put your money where your mouth is. Like, you've had to pay for these pumps. Like,
Okay, some of them I have gotten for free or from clients, but I never have had any agreement, nor will I ever, to like recommend or review a pump for any company. They ask me sometimes. I'm like, no, I won't do it. You can send me your pump for free. That helps me, but I refuse to
endorse a particular pump.
Parents, I'm not gonna say it's awesome,
Yeah, but you have a lot of experience with using pumps,
and I use a lot of them with my clients.
And we are all about breastfeeding, but when this is the thing, to be real, all I know is how to be totally transparent, is I think lactation consultants are afraid to talk about pumps and bottles and all the things because of the WHO code. And I think people might misinterpret what we're saying of like pump instead of breastfeeding. That's not what we're saying. We're saying sometimes you need a pump, and if you need a pump, you need to know how to use it. And let's be trained on how to use it. That's just plain and simple. So people are afraid to talk about pumps and bottles, or lactation consultants are, because we're supposed to be held to the WHO, the World Health Organization. It's called the WHO
we are allowed
code.
to talk about it even according to the code.
Absolutely. I know.
We're not
People
supposed to
don't
be
realize.
marketing
Yeah,
these
you're just not
things,
putting,
right?
you're not marketing breast milk substitutes before breast. So that is not what we're doing here. But when it comes to the parent and the people, the babies that we're trying to help, because really at the end of the day, we are trying to get more human milk into babies. And those babies that are in a NIC unit or too weak to actually latch and extract milk on their own need the use of hand expression or pumping. And so if it's okay with you, I just want to demo what some people might consider a properly fitted flange.
Yeah.
I should have probably, well, you're demoing yours later on, or I was like, I should have gotten a size 24 so you can see how terrible. But this is a normal size. Like, I just want you to see, this is my little breast model. Trying to think what I can compare it to. I know on one of these studies I had like nickels and dimes and stuff, like coins.
But those are very, very rare nipple sizes, right? I mean, they may exist. Nipples that are like, this is 27 right here. That's 27.
Yeah, this nipple is not a 27.
Right?
This one is
Most
like,
nipples are not. But if your nipple actually is at the tip, I'm so glad there's flanges for you.
yes.
They're just super rare nipples. And
Okay, I see what you're saying. So if you were a 20, this would be a 27. This one right here, it kind of looks like the size of a quarter. Is that, would you say? Or a nickel? So
No,
if your
it's more of a
actual tip
quarter
of
for
your
sure.
nipple is as wide of a nipple, excuse me, if the tip of
Definitely
your
a quarter.
nipple is the size of a nickel, that is a tongue
It's a
twister.
quarter. It's really a quarter, the
A
27.
quarter?
Yep.
I think a 30 looks like a quarter, this
Really?
one. All I know is it's
I don't
big.
have money handy. But
I think a 27 is closer
I think a
to.
nickel is more like a 22 or 23. Probably 22.
Okay, well, if your nipple is anywhere larger than a nickel,
26 is probably a quarter.
okay,
Hmm.
you
Anyway.
that's fantastic for you, but most people don't have
Right.
the tip of their nipple like a dime or like a nickel, even if we know what these coins really look like, because we're not using money these days. We're using Venmo. So this is more kind of like similar to what you might see a real nipple look like. And I just want to show you when you pump what it might look like. Let's see. I'm kind of new to this.
Showing it on camera. Is the pump? Oh, the pump's on. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and then you're getting that splashback. You're getting that like movement of the areola into
yeah.
the.
Wait. Let's not give it away yet. So
Oh.
So do people, when you're watching this, look at this little nipple. I don't know if you can see.
Yep.
A lot of people would say, "Oh, that looks like a good fitting flange. There's space on the top, there's space on the bottom. We're doing great." And what I'm here to tell you is, you can see that says it's a size 13 millimeter flange. Just imagine if I put this nipple inside of a size 24 flange, which is like 9 milliliters larger, it would suck in this whole areola. And so now, Jeanette, you can go on and explain
There's a
why maybe this is
24.
not the goal.
See how there's
That's
a
a 24.
And
Yeah,
this
that's huge.
nipple, what is this nipple? It's probably at the tip, it's a 14, 13, 14.
Oh, I can't hear you. You're
It's a 13 or 14, this nipple tip.
okay. So that one's a
and
little bit bigger,
24
yeah.
was really, really big. So
That's a good sized model.
yeah.
Mine's a little bit smaller, so this nipple in itself is.
But also, why are there so many even the knitted breast models have tiny nipples. And if you look at ancient history, like statues from Greece, from Rome, all the modern statues, even like artworks, paintings, nipples are tiny.
Yeah, these are huge. I have some here. This model that I just showed really belongs more like in a size 10.
Mm-hmm.
So that one right there, I would expect that mom to be feeling some pinching, and she might need to pump a little bit longer to get the same volume of milk out than if she were in a smaller size flange. So that's just to give you a small little visual of what most people's nipples, I mean, even this size nipple is still, I mean,
Pretty common.
it's a pretty common size nipple. So most of us are not going to be fitting in those size 21s. I mean, the problem is that when your nipple gets swollen, people think they're a 21 because they're measuring some of the areola. And so
they're measuring the swollen part, which is not how you do it.
right.
But also this random recommendation to add millimeters to find the size of your flange is not based in any truth whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it's been an assumption that there's evidence behind that, and there's not.
So tell us a little bit about the research that you were just doing and what you're hoping to maybe be able to
Prove
to show from that.
So I was curious to have some research done so I could prove this, because what me and you and many other lactation professionals, and I say lactation professionals, getting back to the doula idea, like I used to be a birth doula and I would refer to IBCLCs all the time. I became a breastfeeding counselor too at the same time, but there's only so much we can do when we're a breastfeeding counselor, breastfeeding specialist, CLE, CLC, all the different names that you can be, where you take like a week or two of training. And that doesn't usually include breast pumping either. But if I or you can help a doula help their client to figure out the flange size, and that's all the only problem that that person had, then awesome. I'm so glad for that client. I'm so happy that doula could help them, right? But it's also an opportunity to say, okay, let me help you. And then, if you're still having some issues, who is in my community that can be some lactation professionals that I can refer to outside of what your doula is trained to do, or your breastfeeding counselor, or your CLC, whatever that is, right? So it's a team effort, like so many things in life. So it's a great thing to do, is to try the different flanges. And what was your original question before I veered onto?
Tell me about the research, what you're trying
right.
to, you and I together are like, we need each other to bring us back.
ADHD Central. Okay, so the research, I had given a presentation a couple years ago and to many, many people. And I said, I need someone to help me do a study on this because I need to prove it, because we're seeing it clinically, meaning that we're seeing it in our practices, especially those who are in private practice who had easy access. We could buy the flanges. We can use them on our clients if we want to. We're seeing these results and we know it works better, but we need to prove it because pump companies and researchers and medical providers are denying that this is true because they think what they knew all along was true when it was based on no evidence. So I was like, I need to get the evidence and publish it. So a researcher in North Carolina, Dr. Lisa Anders, she volunteered and said, hey, let's do this. And so we got some funding from her university, and we were able to do, I think we had 36 volunteers. They were all pumping volunteers who were making adequate milk for their babies, and their babies were between 1 and 6 months old. And once the publication comes out, then other people can really start to duplicate it. Although there are 2 NICUs that are starting to implement our study on a larger scale, which is very exciting. So we had them come in to us or to a couple other people that were trained to do this in North Carolina. And we came to Texas and saw you, and we'd spent a week there and used another practice in their space. Thank you. And what we did was we did a flange fitting for these people. And we discovered what, between the pumping person and us, like what do we think was the best size, that felt the best, got the most milk out. And we gave them an assignment to go home. We told them, for this many pumping sessions, we want around the same time of day, we want you to pump with the standard size. And we figured out how big standard, quote unquote, would be for their size based on the pump manufacturer's recommendations of measuring the base.
Okay.
But we also measured the tips. And left and right can be different as well. And then we also had them pump the same number of times in a week around the same time. So on different days than they were using the standard, with the flanges that we found were best for them. And then they had to weigh their milk, and they had to tally all this and tell us how comfortable they were. And what we found was that it's the nipple tip that matters. There is no algorithm. The statistician looked at that, so you can't say your nipple tip measures this, therefore add X number of millimeters, that will end up being your size. That does not work. We found that was not true, because the breast is the inside anatomy is really complex. So how it reacts to the flange is what we're looking for. So it's not just about the nipple tip size. That's just where you start, right? We found that people were getting, on average, about a half an ounce more milk per pumping session. I've seen people get 4 times as much milk when we get the right size. I'm sure you have too.
Yes.
That doesn't happen all the time, and people were having shorter pumping sessions because they were finding they didn't have to sit there for 30 minutes to get this milk out. They could easily do it in 10 to 20 minutes and feel like they were as comfortably soft in their breast as they wanted to be. And it was like life-changing for them. And they were like, I was so comfortable. I couldn't believe I could ever be that comfortable. So we have that evidence. Now, what I fear is going to happen is people are going to go, well, that's only one study. It has to be duplicated. It has to be larger. Okay, fine, then go do it. But it's really difficult to get funding to do studies in the world of lactation.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the funding, in my experience, for lactation is from pump companies. And if pump companies don't want to make changes because they perceive it'll cost them money, whereas I think it'll make them money, then they're not going to want to put those dollars there, are they? Or maybe they've already put a lot of money, maybe even millions, into research, and now our research is going to prove that some of, if not all of their research needs to be redone.
Right. Well, I can't wait for those results to be published. I give you a lot of credit for even taking the time to do that and meeting with so many people. I know you've gotten into the nitty-gritty about why can't we have different pump sizes or flange sizes inside the box, and you've done a lot of work. Tell me what you would say to someone who's sitting here listening, wondering about hands-free pumps, like the kind that you kind of stick in your bra and they're inconspicuous. Wearables.
So
those are a little different to size. Is that correct?
They are. Well, slightly.
It's hard to see, I guess, basically.
For most of them, it's hard to see. But again, I don't really care about the seeing. We can't see inside a baby's mouth. So I always say, sure, when you're using the typical flanges like you've just been showing, right? Like they're clear plastic usually. And so you can see, but we can't see inside a baby's mouth. So there's a point where we need to stop looking and go, how much milk is coming out and how comfortable does this pumping person feel? Mm-hmm. Those are the two most important things. It's not always about what it looks like.
Sure.
Because every once in a while, someone has different anatomy inside their breast. And even though they look like they might be a 15 millimeter flange, and they say that that feels super comfortable to them, they actually get more milk out with a 17 or an 18 or 19. Not that common. I've seen it happen, right? Or even larger sometimes. Very rare, but it happens because the interior anatomy is different, right?
Got it.
So I'm not saying this is 100% of people, this method, it should be the same size as your nipple. That's not what I'm saying. But it's really wearables you can't see, but also they press into your breast typically, right? Or a wearable cup even that's attached externally with a tube to another pump. It's pressing into the breast, first of all. The tunnels sometimes are much shorter, and you have to use a silicone insert because none of the pump companies, even the ones I've asked, have made a hard flange that are in different sizes.
For the wearable pumps.
For the wearables. And I find that hard plastic works better than silicone almost every time.
I was hoping you would talk about that. Yeah,
a few people who can use a silicone insert or a silicone, and the whole flange is silicone. And they have tons of milk and they get plenty of milk out and they're super comfortable, fine. What I jokingly say to all my clients in that situation is don't tell your friends.
It's like, the baby who sleeps over the night, like 2 weeks of life, like don't tell your friends. They're going to hate you. Yeah.
Well, it's not even that you're going to hate you. It's that they're going to go, well, my friend uses that pump and it's got a silicone flange. Or, oh, she just put inserts in and she gets plenty of milk. Oh, but I don't. Oh, well, I have a low supply. No, it's because your friend made that pump work because she has so much milk.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good information. So I'm glad you touched on that because there's a lot of things there with the hands-free pump. I do talk about them, hands-free or wearable, depending what kind. I am going to be talking about these things in the book that I have coming out. But it is something to just right now, just to tell everyone, a wearable or hands-free pump is not going to be your initial pump. So it's not your primary pump. It's not the pump you want to use when you have a baby that's less than 3 to 4 months old. So please just hold off on registering for that. Save your money for a good lactation consultation. It's not going to be the thing you use in the first few months of life. So just please hold off on that. Don't even register for right now because it really does depend on what your milk volume is like after 3 or 4 months of life. Then we can try to fit you and find a hands-free or a wearable pump that works for your milk flow based on what your work or your needs are going to be. So, just getting one pump when you're still pregnant is like buying a car it's like buying a minivan when you ain't even pregnant yet. You're not even married. You just don't even know you're gonna have one baby, two baby. You're gonna have, are you gonna stay married? Like what's happened? We're too early in the life cycle. So that's my little 2 cents on those wearable pumps. And I'm glad you talked about silicone versus hard plastic. So really, really important. So tell families, I'm a mom. I live in the middle of somewhere far away from Milk Diva or away from Massachusetts where you are, and I'm pregnant or I'm having pumping pain. What do you think the next steps for that person should be?
I mean, if they don't have someone near them, which most people don't yet, right? Because most lactation professionals don't have this training yet, which is why I do what I do and provide training. Um, then you're like, well, okay, or maybe there is a lactation consultant that's an hour away from you you'd be willing to go to, and she probably can give you a lot of good help, but she may not be the person to go to for pump stuff yet. Virtual is a possibility, right? Especially post pandemic. Most people are used to Zoom at this point or some sort of service like that. And except the issue is, I really find it's vital for you to have the flanges. The best type of flange fitting is when you're doing it for virtual and in person, is that you have some flanges to try.
I feel
And
like parents
so,
could like totally like send a picture of their nipple on our portal, and then like you do, like you said, just I love to do this, and then we can say, hey, go on Amazon, grab these 3 flanges, and let's do a fitting together. And we'll talk about some other things like pump settings too. We didn't even talk about
right.
cycle versus suction versus like how long to pump or any of that. That's really something where we can get into more of the nitty gritty on a individualized type
Right,
consultation
because I
virtually.
don't want anybody just listening to some Instagram meme made by some pump or herbal company that says, start on this level, do that for 2 minutes, then change to this vacuum level, then do that for 2 minutes, then change to this. And then people come into us and they've got damage and pain, and we're like, why were you doing, like, show me what you've been doing. And they're like, well, I do this and this. How come? I don't know. I saw it on Instagram, or somebody told me to do it that way. And I'm like, but it hurts you.
Yeah.
Why would
Yeah.
you do that? Well, I
Yeah.
thought I was supposed to. I thought pumping was supposed to hurt. I mean, isn't it? Right?
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, moms, we
that's
go through so
that's a
much. Now
problem.
tell us, for the birth professionals that are listening to this, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a hospital unit or maybe it's a doula or maybe it's a, I don't know, anyone else who's helping with moms and
Yeah.
babies. How would they be able to learn more about flange fitting and the best way to do that?
So I have an on-demand course that's about an hour and a half long, plus some bonus videos called "Fitting Flanges for Pumping Milk" that anybody can take. Although I do have a pumping course for parents as well. That's
A
so
pumping course for parents.
yeah, it's
Okay, cool.
pump and bottle ready. That's on demand, and people can always reach out to me with questions before or after they take the course. And I also have longer courses. So I have a course October 1st coming up that part of it is virtual, where you do, I mean, part of it is on demand. And then the other part is 4 hours live with me via Zoom, where just a bunch of birth professionals of different kinds. I've had physicians and chiropractors take it, speech language pathologists, doulas, childbirth educators, breastfeeding counselors, of course. And it's called Pumping and Bottle Feeding for Perinatal Professionals. That's coming up October 1st. So that's an
2024.
option. And then I have IBCLC courses that are on demand as well, that are longer and much more thorough about all sorts of feeding gear, pumps. It's about, I've got so many pumps, so many bottles. I think I own like 87 bottles now. And it's about every part of gear. So anything that an IBCLC should know about, I have that. I'm also taking that workshop on the road live in person in October. I'm bringing it to Mansfield, Massachusetts, and Lexington, Kentucky, and Atlanta, Georgia, and Princeton, New Jersey. So those are 5 workshops in October where people can come in
Busy.
person, and we're going to
Okay.
have real lactating people to actually do flange fittings with in the room all together. You get to touch everything. We'll play with things. We'll do some really fun activities. It's very, very interactive, very fun. It's unlike any other
Right.
lactation event I've ever been to. So I created one that's way more fun and way more interactive.
That's great. I love it. I love it. This has been super informative. I just appreciate your time. I know that you are a busy woman. I hope that we've been able to help prevent people from just sitting there cranking up the pump and enduring the pain just to try to feed their baby and doing things that I did 20 years ago. There's so much more that we know now. So we're learning more thanks to people like you who are doing this amazing research in hopes to just doing better. So you learn more, you do better. You know, as it go, you know better, you do better, I think.
Know better, do better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is, again, just to say, like on my website, babiesincommon.com, you can find my Flange Fits guide. It's free in 21
Yes.
languages. And it's, parents can print that out.
Yes.
Professionals can just print that out and follow the directions on the back and look at it, message me with questions. But there's a point where it's really nice to take a course where you have videos you can watch and you can see, oh,
Yes.
that's what it's supposed to look like. But
Yeah, you're very generous to make that accessible to so many people in so many languages. But it's almost like this is a 4D type of a thing, and you have like a 2D printout. It's just not going to cut it, but it's a nice teaching aid once you've learned more of the topic matter, if that makes sense. So I'm going to put some of your links in the show notes, and then your courses, all the things you have going on in October. This should be airing in September. So it'll be cool for you to look at her website, look at Jeanette's website, see if you can participate in any of those things coming up in October. And then she always has events throughout the year, as long as you just kind of visit her website. So is there anything else you want to let our listeners know?
No, just keep up the good work. Keep asking questions. If you don't get good answers from whoever's talking to you about pumping or nursing, then sometimes you got to ask them more questions, because maybe they didn't have time to tell you those other answers. And sometimes you got to say, you know what, maybe that's not their specialty. Let me go check out somebody else.
Yeah, that's true. That's good. I love it. It's always great to chat with you. I really appreciate you, Jeanette.
It was good to see you and hang out with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.